friends and family who are here, both in the sanctuary and on Zoom. I know there's a lot of folks who are here on Zoom from all across the country supporting me today. So I wanted to say a special welcome to them, and thank you all. We really do welcome you. Our reading this morning is a classic poem called The Guest House by the great Sufi poet Rumi. This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture, still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. So I knew immediately that my house was the right one for me. You see, there's an old-fashioned brass door knocker on my front door that's in the shape of a pineapple. It's one of the reasons I felt connected to the house when I bought it nearly 25 years ago. It meant that others who lived there before me shared some of the same values as me. The symbol of the pineapple has long been a symbol of hospitality. Legend has it, when the European settlers came to the New World, they saw pineapples hanging outside the door of natives. They assumed that it meant that they were welcome, and thus they brought the practice of hanging pineapples on the door back to the Old World and then later to their homes in the New World. Growing up in a small town in north central Massachusetts, my family believed in hospitality. There was always an extra plate for anyone who stopped by near dinner time, or a casserole or a pie for someone who was ill or grieving. But while my parents practiced hospitality, they didn't believe in radical hospitality the way that I do. For me, radical hospitality includes everyone, no matter the color of your skin, no matter what language you speak, no matter your religious or faith tradition, where you are on your spiritual journey, or whom you love. And my parents just couldn't understand that level of openness. My mother especially feared people different from her, and sadly, one day admitted that she was racist and homophobic. Because this practice of radical hospitality was such a part of my UU values, I ended up becoming estranged from my family over 20 years ago. However, because I lived out my values, I have been blessed with an extended family, many of whom are here today in the sanctuary or on Zoom. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, there was a popular movement around radical hospitality in Unitarian Universalism. The idea was that you would interact with different people from diverse experiences and meet them where they are in their spiritual journey. Indeed, Marilyn Sewell, the Minister Emerita of the First Unitarian Church of Portland, Oregon, writes, "Radical means out of the ordinary, revolutionary even. So what would it mean to receive someone, a stranger, with a presence that was not just polite, but to receive them with revolutionary generosity?" To me, radical hospitality is a spiritual practice that requires us to trust one another right off the bat, to be open and curious, vulnerable and reflective, to notice and engage with those folks who are different from us. But in the US, many of us don't harbor that much trust. Most of us lock our doors. Some folks even walk on the other side of the street when they see a group of young boys of color walking down the street. Some turn away from those who are homeless and begging. Some folks aren't comfortable enough to create relationships with someone from the LGBTQ community or someone who is neurodiverse. And many folks go out of their way not to pass through an impoverished neighborhood. But why? Sociologist Brené Brown says that lack of trust is due to our own personal fears. Fear of being hurt, fear of those different from ourselves. But what are we as individuals and as society truly afraid of? How can we practice radical hospitality if we don't trust? Hospital, hospice, hospitable, hospitality, all come from the same root word, meaning generous, caring, and sustaining. And those concepts are rooted in community. And indeed, I grew up in a small community where we didn't lock our doors unless we went on vacation. We knew all of our neighbors, and we felt safe. But many of us in the US move away from our small communities that we grew up in. Or we grow up in cities where it's harder to find a sense of community among so many strangers. Robert Putnam, a political scientist from Harvard University, whose research included interviews with 30,000 Americans, looked at what happens when a diverse group of people live in the same area, for example, a city. He found that when people are near people unlike themselves, they tend to hunker down. Not only do they not interact as much with people who are different from themselves, but they don't even interact with the people they most closely identify with. He discovered that the level of trust and interaction is greatest when people are with others who are most like themselves, and that in the face of diversity, most people actually retreat. So you can imagine my surprise in learning that other countries have a different approach to radical hospitality. There are cultures that trust total strangers. One day in December 2022, when Paco and I were just outside the fabric market in Dakar, shopping, in fact, for the fabric for these outfits, we both needed the restroom and couldn't find one. And I felt both embarrassed and shocked when Paco just walked up to somebody's house, knocked on the door, and asked to use the restroom. And that we were graciously received in without fear or question. How many Americans would dare to either knock on the door or to answer it? I kept wondering in amazement about this until I dug deeper into the Senegalese culture. Other than some petty theft, the Senegalese are largely peaceful culture, and ordinary citizens don't usually have access to guns or weapons. One could argue that without weapons, it's easier to trust others because the fear of being hurt is removed. But it goes deeper than that. The idea of radical hospitality is woven into their fabric of the everyday culture. And indeed, the Senegalese pride themselves on their hospitality so much that they even have a word for it, La Teranga. And they even named their soccer team, the one that went to the quarterfinals in the World Cup a few years ago, the Lions of Teranga. So the Senegalese are legendary throughout all of Africa for their warm hospitality. A little curious and grateful for my ability to speak and read French, I researched this concept a little more while I was there in Dakar. The term teranga has been around since the 15th century, but it came widely into use after 1960 with Senegal's independence from France. Senegalese historian Ibra Sene described it as treating a stranger like a member of your family. And the travel blogger Beetle Holloway noted that, quote, often described as a blend of hospitality, respect, community, and solidarity, teranga is in fact much more than a set of values. Even the most famous singer in Senegal Yusu Ndor, wrote a song about Teranga. And one of the lines of the lyrics translates roughly as, "When someone arrives in your country, welcome him, honor him in such a way that when he leaves, he'll want to come back." So therefore, in Senegal, even when the family has little food, an extra plate is saved in case of a visitor. The best pieces of meat are always saved for the guests. And when I suggested that we pay for the ingredients for a family dinner to celebrate our arrival, Paco asked me, should we have goat or lamb? And I said, I think a half a goat should do, thinking of the 16 people living in Paco's father's house. But Paco finally convinced me that we needed to buy a full goat, because he explained that his sister-in-laws would invite their friends to stop by, and the neighbors would stop by after smelling the goat roasting, and therefore we needed more than just an extra plate or two. And indeed, by the time we were through, we served nearly 30 people. Senegal has 6 main ethnic groups. The largest is Wolof, which is the group that Paco is from. And they have 3 main religions: Islam, Christianity, and animism. The different religious groups actually prepare common dishes for each other at religious holidays and festivals, and no one goes hungry on any holiday. And the different ethnic groups live together without conflict, except for maybe a little political ideology. So Teranga manifests itself in daily life, and here's some things that I've observed. A stranger will help you carry a heavy load or change a car tire. Our taxi driver let us use his cell phone without hesitation to call our lodging. There's a traditional greeting that asks of the health of your family, even if you've never met the person. The Senegalese teach their young children about the tradition of Teranga. And they have a collectivist, communal view of society rather than a focus on the individual as we do here in the West. Teranga, then, is a cultural practice of giving, sharing, and respecting the differences of others. And as a result, while Senegal has poverty, there is very little homelessness or death by starvation. But Teranga is also a spiritual practice for the Senegalese. In our reading today, Rumi wrote, "Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond." And the connection between Rumi and La Teranga is no coincidence. Both Rumi and 90% of the Senegalese population are Sufi Muslim. At the heart of Sufism is peace, love, and hospitalities as values to be practiced every day. Each hospitable interaction with a stranger teaches us something about ourselves and opens us to new possibilities and new relationships. There are those who come to our church for the first time. They're often coming to start over at something, and they come for many reasons. Sometimes they've just moved into the area. Sometimes they've had a life crisis and are seeking spiritual grounding, or they feel alone and are in need of community. They are looking for self-acceptance or acceptance from others. We worship associates in our weekly welcome intentionally state, we're glad you're here. And we are. But sometimes words aren't enough. We might be glad that they're here, but we need our actions to mirror our words. And yet, we're human, right? And we face the daily challenges that all humans face. Some days we can be welcoming, and some days we ourselves need to be welcomed. It's comforting to know that we're part of a community when we come to church, and we can receive or provide that welcome. However, we often gravitate to those who we know and we're comfortable interacting with. I know I'm guilty of that. We are often less comfortable engaging with those who have different ideas or cultural assumptions or ways of being in the world. Unitarian minister Marilyn Sewell writes, quote, "Radical hospitality is a term that rolls easily off the tongue. To actually carry it out is a demanding undertaking. But we are not a department store, not a government agency, not an HMO. In all these places, one would expect to be received politely, as it were, served as is our due. No, we are a church. And it is appropriate that we ask ourselves what is the moral dimension of our hospitality, the moral dimension of our reception of others, of our solidarity with others who may not look like us or move from the same assumption and values. I'm not talking about being politically correct or legalistic. I'm talking about hospitality as a spiritual practice. I'm not talking about opening the doors. I'm talking about opening the heart. And I might add to that quote, and to be courageous and trusting enough to do it without fear. To me, this is the essence of Teranga, practiced so easily by the Senegalese culture, but less so when it comes to our own culture. UUA staff member Renee Rahutsky shares insights about those congregations that embrace the idea of radical hospitality. She writes, "Look at the congregations that are growing. These are communities that see each new person who comes through their doors as a gift, a mysterious treasure whose value will be revealed over time and that will enrich the community in some way. And they know that this takes time, patience, and unconditional loving kindness." Isn't that what Rumi just said? To take each person who walks through our door as a gift? Isn't that La Teranga? We are a community that invites you to awaken to love. That's our mission here at UUSMC. But we can't awaken to love if our hearts are closed, if we don't practice radical hospitality as a spiritual practice every day, if we don't truly trust each other and welcome everyone who comes through our doors without fear, no matter who they are or what they bring to this sacred community. So I leave you with this. When will you invite the stranger in? When will you trust in yourself and others enough to let go of the fear of difference? Be radical. Be out of the ordinary. Be revolutionary. Practice Teranga. Start today. Start right now. Amen. And may you be blessed.